time on it as we would like. We are going to go back over. I just kind of remembered we had the children's cabinet and things were still in flux. There had been some things that now have happened in appropriations that I think I understand 80–90% of it, of things that needed to happen and that you were expressing to us. But we had very limited time the first time that you kind of gave us testimony and a report on your program. And so we're going to have a review. I see a KLRD report. Is that just from the children's cabinet, or was that something that I needed to call on? I think it's just kind of where they get their funding. Okay. With that, we have Melissa Rooker with the Children's Cabinet, Executive Director, and we welcome you. Thank you for being in committee today. I will say, if I sound a little out of breath, it's because I skipped out on my duties. Representative Wynn was scalding me a little bit. Scalding you? Scalding? I did say that wrong, didn't I? But I had a Dodge City group, and it's 4 hours away. And when they're here, I try and take a little bit of extra time. And I was going to try and squeeze it in between floor and committee, and it just wasn't going to happen with some of the things happening on the floor today. So, Representative Wynn, you have a little comeback that you would like to say?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Surprise. All right.
However, Ms. Rooker's already finished, so we already had the report.
Oh, already done?
Without you.
All right. Melissa Rooker, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for your time today. I know at 3:30, when there's just an informational briefing, it can be tempting on a beautiful day like this. So we are here today to help enhance your understanding of the role the Children's Cabinet plays in the early childhood ecosystem in Kansas. I will provide an overview of our Children's Cabinet, delve into a little bit more detail about what we do and why we do it. We'll invite Dr. Harwood to talk about the intersection with the preschool programs and early childhood things that happen within the KSDE administration with our USDs, and then I'll come back and wrap up with a little bit of insight for why there might be a bill moving or not moving. I don't know what the status is, but the attempt to try and unify the governance of early childhood in Kansas. I will pause at a couple points along the way to allow time for questions because we're going to go through a couple different aspects of our work. So bear with me, and we'll get the slides up and we will get going. So you tell me when we're ready. So I'm in control now? Okay. So I do want to give you background on the Children's Cabinet. For those of you who are newer to the legislature, Kansas really has been a leader in the country when it comes to early childhood. We were the first state in the nation to create a children's trust fund in 1980. We were also the first state in the nation to create a children's cabinet. That happened in 1999. Those actions happened through the legislative process. The creation of the Children's Cabinet was the legislature's response to Kansas' participation in the Master Tobacco lawsuit and the subsequent settlement. The annuity from that settlement agreement is directed by statute to be deposited annually in the Kansas Endowment for Youth. The KEY Fund is the acronym that we use. The original trust fund was converted into the KEY Fund by the 1999 legislation. So that is the receiving account, if you will, for the annuity. The original, the concept was that we would create an endowment that would grow over time to a point where it could spin off enough interest income to support the programs that the funding was designed to support. The legislation also created the Children's Cabinet as the governance group for governing a budget, a piece of the state budget known as the Children's Initiatives Fund, or CIF. So you saw part of the budget in our budget presentation as part of KSDE, and we'll get to why in a little bit. But it's annually part of the state budget process to appropriate funding for the line items that make up the Children's Initiative Fund. The Cabinet Governing Board exists to manage, administer the funds the legislature appropriates to us. And it's all, 100% of our funding for the Children's Initiative Fund is sourced from the tobacco settlement agreement. So the memo that is on your table is something that KLRD does pretty much annually because every year there is an annuity payment that gets paid out. So this tracks the background and history. It shows you on page 2 that the annual amount of the settlement annuity that Kansas has received since inception. So it dates back to 1999. You can see it fluctuating, but we are in a downward trend, and that is because of policy changes related to cigarette sales. So Tobacco 21 initiative, which is the right thing to do for people's health, it impacts the sale of cigarettes. It's also important to note that vaping products, e-cigarettes, those things are not part of the settlement agreement. It was a lawsuit that was fought over combustible tobacco products, so anything you light up, so cigarettes and that product. The e-cigarettes, that whole universe of products is really, I would say, probably the tobacco company response to having to pay into this settlement. It's a workaround. Those products, those sales don't benefit us in any way. So there's concern that the annuity will continue to decline over time and that we are feeling the impact of that decline already. It's what we came and asked you to do, is cut a couple line items that were new last year. We just don't have the budget capacity without a different source of income being added in. So I wanted you to have the background, and then I think the key on this memo is the back page shows the transfers that have been made directly from the Key Fund to SGF over time, and the transfers that have been made from the Children's Initiative Fund to SGF over time. Those are important to follow because those are just going into the state general fund and not actually we have some transfers to other agencies for specific reasons. We'll be talking about that, but these are just putting money back in the state budget, so presumably during difficult budget years. So the schematic on screen just really is designed to show you the flow of funding. The Children's Cabinet has statutory roles and responsibilities. So defined in statute are specific actions that we are directed to take, and they are shall things. They are not may things. So we are to advise the governor and the legislature regarding the use of money credited to the Children's Initiative Fund, evaluate programs that utilize the Children's Initiative Fund dollars. So that is our annual accountability process. I think in that first meeting, I had provided a copy of our annual report. That is how we take the reporting that is generated throughout the year. We compile that into that annual report, both to our board, and then we convey it here. We are supposed to help support the prevention of child abuse and neglect, assist the governor in developing and implementing a coordinated, comprehensive delivery system to serve children and families in Kansas, identify barriers, gaps, and challenges that families face when trying to access services for their children from state and federal programs, and then coordinate across interagency and interdepartmental lines. So there are boundaries and silos we'll talk about later, but our job is to serve as a point of connection and a hub to help bring people together in different programs and work on breaking down the silos that exist. As mentioned, we have a governing board. It is made up of 9 voting members. 5 of those are appointed by the governor. Only 3 can be from a single political party. The other 4 are appointed by legislative leadership, so the Speaker, the Senate President, and both minority leaders currently have appointment power. The appointments can be lawmakers, but they can also be subject matter experts, and we have enjoyed a 26-year history of really balanced governance and people really committed to the work that we're doing in a manner that most of the time, not all the time, but mostly stays outside of partisan battles. We have 6 ex officio non-voting members serving in advisory roles. They represent DCF, KDHE, KSDE, the Juvenile Justice Division of Department of Corrections, the Board of Regents, and the Judicial Branch. Staffing of the cabinet involves my role as executive director plus 5 FTEs. We are in the process of filling 1 vacancy and remain a small but mighty team because we have an MOU in place with the Department of Education that defines certain functions that the agency will provide for us. So the most important is they serve as our fiscal agent, which is why our piece of the Children's Initiative Fund budget is housed inside of the KSDE budget. They also, just some basic back office functions, so IT support, HR support, that kind of thing is defined in the MOU, so we don't have to carry extra staff to do that kind of thing. We have the arrangement, and they provide those services. So we have a really strong working relationship within the agency, but the MOU makes clear the cabinet does not, we don't report to the State Board of Education or the commissioner. Our report to is as part of the executive branch to the governor. So that, and prior to arriving at KSDE in 2015, we were with DCF, and prior to that, at origination, it was SRS, which was an agency that was reconstituted in the mid-2010s. Statute requires that we engage an institution of higher learning to conduct our annual evaluation process, so we honor that commitment through agreements both with the KU Center for Public Partnerships and Research to handle the overall accountability process for the CIF portfolio writ large. They also provide certain backbone support functions by agreement. We also engage Wichita State University for something we call the Common Measures Initiative, which is specific to the Early Childhood Block Grant recipient programs. This graph on screen is a breakdown. It's in our annual report. It is the CIF budget in sort of an infographic context so that you can see how it is broken down. We have line item, and sorry, it's probably too small to read from your chair, but working our way from the bottom up, DCF receives 1 line item transfer. It's $5,033,000. It is a portion of the state match required to draw down federal funds in the Child Care Development Block Grant Program. So we provide about a third of the state responsibility, I think, through the tobacco funding. That began in about 2014 when we were having significant budget challenges. KDHE is next. There are 4 line item transfers to KDHE. The largest is $5.8 million that matches, it serves as part of the state responsibility to draw down for Part C services, early childhood developmental services. In Kansas for a long time, we've known that as Tiny K. We also send $1.6 million to them for maternal child health home visiting, $1 million for tobacco use prevention, which is a requirement of the settlement, and then $120,000 or so to the Kansas SIDS network to do training on safe sleep practices. KSDE has 2 transfers from the CIF budget. There's $9.4 million that goes to KSDE to support parents as teachers. That is given out as grants. through the agency. And then 4.2 million comes from the CIF. It goes to KSDE for the Kansas Preschool Pilot Program. Dr. Harwood will talk to you more about both of these programs when he presents. The rest of Kansas Preschool Pilot, though, is funded by TANF, so there's no state general fund dollars going to those programs. In-house, the Children's Cabinet itself oversees the Dolly Parton Imagination Library line item, which is $1.5 million this year. Likely next year, I will be bringing Cabinet Board recommendation to increase that, but we'll rearrange existing resources to do it, but it's growing. That is the book gifting program started by Dolly Parton. Children are eligible from birth until their 5th birthday to receive one free age-appropriate book mailed each month to their home, should their parents choose to enroll them. So purely voluntary. The book is free to the families. We pay half the cost with our funding, and then we have a network of local nonprofit partners across the state that provide the other 50% match. Currently, 45% of eligible Kansas children are enrolled in the program. It equates to over 77,000 Kansas children receiving those books. Our signature program is the Early Childhood Block Grant. That is, it's about $23 million. We currently have 26 grantees serving 63 counties across Kansas. It equates to currently a little over 8,000 children receiving services, close to 7,000 families receiving services, because it's 2-gen supports. We follow an investment model that we call the Blueprint for Early Childhood. It is healthy development, strong families, and early learning. So there's parent education programs and home visiting, that kind of thing, laced into those grants. I have numbers that date back to 2018. My appointment to the cabinet was February of 2019. So there's more data in the database, but I didn't really have, I can pull it if you want to know since inception. We can see how far back we can go, but we have served just shy of 50,000 children since 2018 with our funding. Our focus is on children birth to 5 with identified risk factors and their families. These programs facilitate the acquisition of language, the early language and literacy skills necessary for success later on, life skills, getting along, playing well with others, sharing our toys, all of those early skills that set kids up for success. The cabinet distributes our grants through a statewide competitive RFP process. The RFP opened this year in November. We closed applications in January. We've been in a review period. The April board meeting is where we will provide a slate of recommendations to the board for consideration for FY26 awards. So it is a highly competitive process. I can tell you $23 million in funding. We have over $34 million in requests at the moment that I think we're having to winnow through. So Wichita State, as mentioned, the Center for Applied Research and Evaluation conducts the annual evaluation of the programs that receive ECBG grant funding. And so we do, that annual report is pretty detailed. We look at the progress the kids are making. There are 3 evaluation periods for the preschool programs in our grant universe that we look at fall, winter, and spring, pre-literacy, pre-numeracy skills, and always appreciate the improvement that's shown. We also have a line item known as the Early Childhood Infrastructure line item. This is really overhead and some one-time funding for one-time things. And we have a couple shared projects with other partner agencies. So we source funding to support like right now we're supporting the development of a child care workforce registry to move the process of tracking the professional development coursework that is required as part of licensing. It's been paper-based. We're moving to an online digital platform, so we have contributed a share of funding, and we help support 1-800-CHILDREN, which is a helpline for parents. It's purely information and resource directory. It's both a traditional telephone number, 1-800-CHILDREN, as well as a mobile app and an online database. So we contribute funding for that kind of thing. The key fund transfer, and you've got a budget table in front of you that has, it's not the nice graph, but it is the raw numbers. The key fund transfer has a summary table, and I want to draw your attention to the fact that for 2024 in April, the annuity was $49.9 million. That funds the FY25 budget. The FY25 budget for the CIF is close to $63 million, and so the gap is filled by the ending balance in the key fund. So when you see how much needs to cover that gap, that's really how we are suddenly this year in some financial straits. The Consensus Revenue Estimating Group reduced their estimate outlook in November from where they had it set in spring because the spring annuity missed the estimate slightly. So it was the combination of about $7.5 million added to the CIF in the budget process last year that we weren't expecting, and the reduction in the outlook it combined to reduce the ending balance by about $13 million and put us in some difficulty. We are aiming for a $54 million budget for FY26. There is still a bit of a gap, but it will end. The budget table shows us landing with a positive ending balance, which is going to give us time to examine our budget we do our budget work at our June meeting. So the board and I will look at where we are with things, but I just want to alert you, we've got some structural problems with the CIF budget. So we thank the House for honoring the CIF recommendations made by the Cabinet. The budget you passed to the Senate actually took care of removing the 2 line items that we had requested. And we are hopeful that we will come out of the final budget process unharmed and in the position that we currently inhabit. There are 2 transfers coming out of the key fund directly that are there has to be proviso language to do that because there's language in the budget to do it because it's not the way the key fund is designed to operate. So the Attorney General's office receives close to $500,000 and the Department of Revenue receives about $1.2 million. So combined, almost $2 million out the door off the top before anyone ever looks at the CIF budget. That's not the statutory framework for the key fund. That's a special transfer. I can tell you from historical perspective, those started in 2014 to close the hole we had in the state budget at that time. So both agencies use those funds for what they call tobacco settlement compliance. I would argue Kansas levies taxes on cigarettes, and both agencies would be tracking the sale of cigarettes with or without the annuity being a factor. So they do have to file a report. They do a phenomenal job of tracking those sales. Nobody is questioning that, but I note that because we are going to have some budget issues coming up. Finally, the Cabinet is the state lead for a couple different forms of, 3 different forms of federal funding. One is a formula grant. It's known as Community-Based Child Abuse Prevention Funding, and that is distributed nationwide to states on a formula set up by Congress. It's worth to Kansas this year about $1.4 million, so we have 6 or 7 grant programs receiving those funds to conduct primary prevention activities to prevent child abuse. The preschool development grant is the one in the middle. That's competitive. We have to write a grant application and submit that for consideration through a call for proposals. We have been successful 4 times in securing preschool development grant funding. This year, we're in year 1 of a renewal of that funding. It's a 3-year renewal, subject to continued appropriations by Congress, of course, but it's a $7 million a year, so worth $21 million total. And we're in that first year of that. We lead the work for preschool development grant as a partnership with DCF, KDHE, and KSDE, so the 4 agencies work very closely together. The goal of the program is both strengthening the system itself to make it easier to navigate and access services, and to expand the availability of resources for families. And then the top line is one-time funding that came through federal pandemic relief programs. So CBCAP got an award worth about $2.3 million over a 3-year time frame. We are in the final phase of that, and nearly, we anticipate spending all 3 of these buckets to zero, like we will fully utilize the funding. The second one is the Child Care Capacity Accelerator received some funding from the Spark money that the state got, and DCF provided some of their pandemic relief funds to create the accelerator program to build more child care programs across the state. And then we have a unique program that's funded through ARPA. It comes to us through U.S. Treasury. It's part of an allowance that every state got for capital improvement projects, and they approved us to use it to build multipurpose community facilities that help access to workforce development, education, and healthcare monitoring. Our big win was convincing U.S. Treasury to let us add the requirement that they also provide childcare in these buildings. So we have 10 projects across the state. So all of those funds are out, they're encumbered, as we say. They are obligated to grant awards in all 3 of those categories. All are expected to spend down in full, but they have different timelines. So I'm going to pause here because that's the background and the financials, and I want to stop and let you ask questions if you have them.
I'll start with that last one. What's the spread on where those projects of the kind of the last slide, was there a consideration of all around the state or population centers?
It's always like what's too much information, what's not enough. We have a map that shows the array, and sure. I'd be happy to send it to Rose for the committee. Yeah. We ran all of these with competitive RFPs. So we took applications, and when we were considering the slate of awards to grant, we took a regional approach. So we divided the state into 6 regions, and we reviewed the batches of applications coming from each region so that the competition was not Finney County and Johnson County. It was Southwest Kansas. So we tried to make sure that we did spread as far and as, like making sure that communities all across the state had access to the funding. I will say in the western half of the state, we just didn't receive as many applications to consider, which is always an issue when you have the densely populated Sedgwick County and Northeast Kansas areas. So the map will look a little lopsided, but we absolutely broke it down so that we were considering on a regional basis and making sure that every region received grant funding in both the accelerator and the CPF.
Questions now. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. The building that you were just talking about, you said it was for workforce development. So did that money flow through CIF?
No.
It was just
it comes through the Cabinet Governing Board, but it does not. It's not part of the Children's Initiative Fund budget.
Right, but because these were just special things during COVID.
Yes.
Okay, so did they still flow through that account?
It's the Children's Cabinet, so
which is under CIF.
We manage the CIF budget. The CIF is a budget.
Well, I guess I'm just concerned because if there was a statute, 382104, that says no monies in the fund shall be invested in the, quote, primary investment objective is for economic development, and you're telling us that you use this for workforce development.
I did not know. We are using federal funding from the American Rescue Plan in a manner that is allowable under the conditions of the programs the funding comes from within the components of the American Rescue Plan. It is not the tobacco funding which that statute refers to.
That's what I was trying to
No,
separate out.
absolutely not.
May I ask another one? Thank you. Do you have specific information on how many, like, phone calls, this 1-800 phone lines? I'm a school nurse, and I've never seen this phone number, so that's alarming that
We do
have
have
it.
the metrics. Kansas Children's Service League is the home of 1-800 children, and they report to us, so I can get that for you.
That'd be great, thank you. One more? Thank you. Do you have specific rubrics that you use for selecting, and maybe rubrics is the wrong term, but if your programs have specific objectives, do you have specific measuring ways so when people are applying for these grants, it is?
We use a competitive grant-making process. The applications that we receive are first reviewed in-house to make sure they have all of the necessary pieces. So did they fill out the budget templates? Do they have the assurance letters? Did they describe their program? Like, just a basic, this is a complete application. They're then assigned to external reviewers for scoring, and there is a rubric. And we do extensive TA. We make all of that known to grant applicants, what we are looking for. The scored applications then come back to us, and we have to go through, and there are a lot of factors. Some of it is the reach of the program, the regional spread. Again, we don't want it all concentrated in one area of the state, so we're looking at geography. We're looking at the type of programs. Are they actually proposing the kinds of programs we're looking for in the portfolio? And we have some right now that have things that may be great to do for families, but they're not actually what we are seeking in the grant portfolio. We have a set of measurement tools known as the Common Measures Initiative. This was adopted, I think, in 2014. It's a way of giving if you are a home visiting program, there's a certain type of measurement that's done. Excuse me, all of the home visiting programs that we fund would participate in the measure. KIPS, I think we describe this in our annual report. We have 6 or 8 measurement tools. So those are the measures our evaluators are asking programs to participate in. Not every program is going to need to use every measure because they won't all be appropriate, but the 1 or 2 that apply to their kind of program. So my IGDs are the measurement tool used for preschool classrooms to measure the literacy and numeracy, that kind of thing. So everyone is measured, participates in the evaluation process so that we, on an annual basis, can evaluate whether or not we're seeing the return on investment that we are supposed to see. So that is built into statute, as you note. This is a requirement of being awarded the early childhood block grant funding, and we take it very seriously and report. Our June meeting will be, the board will receive a report on the full CIF portfolio, a breakdown for each program. That information is published in the annual report in December, but the board will receive it at our June meeting. And then either August or October, this year we delayed till October, but generally at one or the other of those meetings, we will have the early childhood block grant report to the board, and then that too will get written up in our annual report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up, we have Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Melissa, it's good to see you kind of see, I've been doing this the whole time, so bob and weave over here. I'm looking and maybe help me understand this a little bit, the endowment fund. You know, and you've got some statutes cited there about the importance of maintaining a balance in there, et cetera, et cetera. But it appears that we've been overspending out of that fund. And I guess that's the way I'd look at it, as if it was my savings account, that we're spending on too many things. Is that under the control of your board to determine that, or who determines what gets spent out of the endowment fund? And also the $21 million grant that you guys received, that doesn't come through the endowment. That's something separate. That's under a different spot in your budget. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't mean this specifically. We'll use the collective version, but you control the spending of what comes out of the Key Fund and what goes into the Children's Initiative Fund. Those are legislative decisions. Our board makes recommendations, but that's all they are. You all come in every year in the budget process, and we are in areas of the state budget. So this is what every post-it is, an agency that has a piece of our funding, or it's one of the line items you see on the page. I will say the House Appropriations Committee did an amendment to simplify things, and they made one section that just has the CIF, because it's really hard. I come here and your focus is the K-12 budget, so you're seeing that half of the budget for the CIF. There are other budget committees that have DCF and KDHE. In fact, it's social service budget. There were days when I needed to be in both committee rooms and couldn't obviously be in both places at once. There's also the General Government Budget Committee has a couple pieces because of the AG, and you know, it's all over the place. So Chairman Waymaster moved to consolidate it so it's easier to see it in its entirety. And KLRD always does the table that we use to help illustrate this, but even in appropriations and ways and means, they're hearing each agency budget on different days. So nobody sees us all at once, typically. So it becomes easy to say, well, instead of funding that with SGF, let's use tobacco funding. And that's what happened last year. There was about $7.5 million flipped in the conference committee phase of the end of the session.
Yeah, but you said 7.5 million? Mm-hmm. But the Children's Fund it took out 61 million last year. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch more other than the 7.5 million. Where's the 54 million going?
Well, that's everything listed here on the flip side of that paper. That's the budget table. So you see it all itemized out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you for answering my question.
Next up, we have Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to look a little bit closer at the Key Fund, and I noticed there's a spot that says transfer to the judicial branch, and there are blanks there. And then the Department of Revenue's 1.24, 1.2 million each year taken out. And my ears always perk up when the Attorney General commandeers more money from various sources. So that's frustrating. But can you tell me a little bit more about why the judicial branch is listed there, and then what is this Department of Revenue line item?
Department of Revenue it's considered tobacco sale compliance efforts. So they have to track the tax revenue generated by the sale of cigarettes. And we have to report that as part of the settlement. Revenue does that anyway because we levy taxes on the sale of cigarettes. So with or without the annuity, with or without this funding, they would need staff to track the sale of cigarettes. The judicial branch, I don't know, given that FY24 actuals no longer have an amount listed. I'm not sure why they're still listed on the table, because that was from a previous time when there was a transfer made directly from the key fund to the judicial branch. I believe it was for CASA, but it's dropped off, and I mean, I don't know why it's shown there, but here we are. And then AG's office also, it has, their role has to do, I think, with the illegal sale of cigarettes and the lack of tax collection, so they're the enforcement arm. So again, it's relevant work to the qualifying to draw down our annuity, but I do think it's work that would be done regardless. So.
Am I remembering last year, the DARE money was pulled out of some of your funds?
Never passed.
Okay, never passed. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity for a follow-up.
Representative Brantley is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. I just wanted to kind of circle back a little bit. You were talking about the grants that were sent out. Who evaluates those grants?
So our governing board determines the award amounts, and then that's where we have both Wichita State and KU involved in the evaluation. So it's university-based research staff that.
So on the, Mr. Chair, on the governing board, is that the 9 members?
Yes.
Can you tell us who those are? Or can you provide those to us?
Yeah, I mean, it's public information.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on our website, and it's in our annual report, which you should have a hard copy of. But there are 5 appointments made by the governor and 4 by legislative leadership at this time.
So that leads me into one more question. So you said that the Children's Fund is within KSDE, and that you report to who do you report to?
I report to the board, but our board, we are part of the executive branch.
So how many entities within KSDE don't report to KSDE but
Just us.
report to the?
It's just us. It's just our unique relationships, so that we are not a full-fledged state agency. If we were, we would need a legal department, a finance department, an HR department, a IT department, like all of those things that create the in-house service array that is needed to support. We have a document. It's a memorandum of understanding that outlines all of the functions the agency will provide to us, so that we don't have to carry that staff and use precious resources on that. So that is the relationship we have. It is a business arrangement, but we are not a division of KSDE.
So you are housed within KSD, but what about like DCF and such? What kind of services do you get from them and KDHE? None?
We don't. We give them funding. We don't get anything from them for us. I mean, the system does, but the cabinet does not have that of any kind of affiliation, other than those are transfers to their agencies from our funding. They then report, as part of our accountability process annually, they'll report metrics to us that we can report out.
Thank you.
Representative Swartberger.
A little while back, you mentioned that there were 2 items removed from the House bill. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Last year, there was 1.1 million added that transferred to DCF for the workforce registry. That was new last year. We recommended not continuing that funding this year from our resources. And there was 1.3 million that was transferred to KDHE. It was for child care provider health and safety grants. Great program. It's been really helpful. But it was something that began with pandemic relief funding. Last year, our CIF funding was used. You can see, we do not have the resources to continue providing that source of funding. If there's a desire to continue giving those awards, it would need to be from other SGF or whatever. Yeah.
All right, Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need to circle back a little bit. Melissa, I guess you need to have on the bottom of your page, turn over and look at the back, dummy.
I would never say that.
I didn't do that. But
I think she said she wanted to say that, but she did bite her lip, so.
and looking through this, there's the section, the parents as teachers and pre-K pilots under Education Commission authority, and I think we see that in this budget, don't we, that goes through here.
Yes.
But I don't remember seeing this other section that's got $34 million in it. It says under the Children's Cabinet Authority. Do we have control over that?
That's us.
Yeah, so when you say the legislature is rating all your money, I'm going, there's 34 million there that, I mean, I kind of take umbrage. I just, can you
No.
explain that to me?
You appropriate these line items as part of the budget process. This is not the money that's been rated. It's over time, if you refer back to the tobacco memo, it's money that the statute says there shall be an annual transfer from the key fund to the Children's Initiative Fund. That is the only destination that the endowment should be funding. Over the history, and you can see it, it's not me just it's in the memo. You can see the number of times, the number of years that there have been transfers out of our budget just into the state general fund for general purposes. That's the funding that I think is not being used in accordance to the vision of the statute. Over time, there are reasons. I have personal knowledge that in 14, 15, 16, and 17, we were struggling with the imbalance in the state budget and had to address tax policy. I mean, that was a very real and very difficult time. I can't speak to prior to that, the reasons that was happening, but it was a thing that happened.
Who determines the amount of money that is transferred into the Children's Initiative Fund out of the endowment? Who determines that?
The state budget determines that.
Okay, but it says this is under the Department of Education, and I don't remember us making that decision.
Well, I mean, it's why I come testify with KSDE on budget day. It's because this budget is part of the testimony that you did receive when I presented it. We didn't have a lot of time to discuss it, but this is prepared by KLRD with all the numbers. I embedded this in my written testimony so that you had it.
We could have recommended that $8 million additional dollars not be transferred out of the endowment into Children's Initiative Fund. We could have done that in this committee because I don't remember seeing that line item.
Well, I would hope that you would follow the recommendations in our testimony and not do that unless that was a thing we sought. But yes, you do have the power to do that.
Okay, as I'm seeing, as I'm seeing this endowment go down and I'm seeing the initiative fund increase by $8 million, I realize there's a lot of complaints about other ancillary issues around the outside of this, but fundamentally, we're spending more in the Children's Initiative Fund than when tobacco money is going down and we increase spending $8 million there, that's probably the wrong way to go.
I cannot disagree, but it will take some thoughtful consideration of what it is that we would choose not to fund. Okay. Because I would say we have been pretty successful over the last 5 years in my tenure of reducing there were other line items that really didn't fit our mission that we have been able to gradually back down from. But this core set of services really does serve the early childhood age range, children birth to 5 and their families. So I don't think the programs that are receiving funds are the wrong fit, but you are correct. We have finite resources that are diminishing over time, so we're gonna have to make some decisions. I just think it's going to need to involve awareness of if you simply strike a line item that is serving as state effort for federal drawdown, it will have implications for the larger program, whether or not we can draw the full.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's a more detailed discussion than you and I can have right here. But I mean, just as a overall look at this, I mean, you know, it's easy to be critical of the legislature, but I mean, it's, that's going the wrong direction.
It's just fact. I'm not trying to come across as criticizing. You asked who's responsible. It is your decision as lawmakers in the budget process. So that is fact, and the facts in the memo speak for themselves as far as what has happened to the potential annuity. So,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Before we go to second questions, I wanted to give people a opportunity on first questions. So I got Representative Owsley and then Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not really a question, but just to the last speaker's point. If I recall correctly, when we were going over the KSDE budget, we skipped the discussion on the Children's Cabinet portion of that budget in this committee, I think in part because their budget is split out into so many different departments that we in this committee didn't take a look at. And if I recall correctly, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, we just kind of punted that whole discussion to appropriation. So that's why you're not recalling the discussion. Thank you.
There was some timing issue on that, and we had discussed it as best we could and made some side recommendations to Appropriations Committee that we agreed on. So, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, I'm switching just a little bit to the issue of vaping, which I consider is dangerous or more dangerous than the cigarette tobacco. Now, are there movements out there to take on the vaping issue? I mean, I know that it's restricted and stuff. Are we going to do something to maybe, because they're making a bunch of money on this, and that's going to hurt. I mean, we already know the answer on that. Just, I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. A few years ago, I had a board member bring a recommendation to our governing board that we should look into filing a lawsuit against the manufacturers of the vaping products. The board adopted that as a recommendation. I did my due diligence. We do not have the power as a state entity to simply file a lawsuit. That power resides with the Attorney General and the Governor. So I leave that there.
Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Melissa, help me remember. I'm looking at page 2 of the KLRD just to respond to Representative Hill. I want to say, first, full disclosure, I was on the Children's Cabinet, and I want to say 2016, only because the 59 million stands out. Representative Hill, there was conversation to sweep the entire 50. Hello, Representative Hill, I'm talking to you. Hey. That's okay. Talking especially to you. But refresh my memory, but I believe there was conversation to sweep the entire 59 million.
It was.
From
Save the CIF was the campaign that was waged by the community, that because the grants we give help programs that are pillars in their community. It's the Russell Child Development Center in Southwest Kansas that serves 26 counties. It's Live Well Northwest Kansas that also serves a big group of counties, et cetera. Like these are really high-quality programs that do amazing work, and the idea of defunding our whole budget to sweep into the SGF to close the budget gap it caused for a huge...
It was a serious conversation.
Yeah, it was...
I'm thinking maybe a couple of months.
Yeah.
Because we were But
And then there was the proposal to sell off the annuity to what's that term, securitize, to turn it into a lump sum payout. One time, it would have been enough to fill the hole in the state budget that year. And there was serious, the governor's office at the time proposed doing just that. We would have stopped the annual payout for the one-time lump sum, and that effort was defeated.
just to refresh, I mean, to inform you of when you kept saying who does it, we try to do it, not me, but the legislature.
Representative Hill, give you an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, because that was kind of directed at me. I mean, I really have no control over what happened.
No, I know that.
I mean, however many years ago.
Absolutely.
I'm just looking at what we're doing this year.
This
and-
year, you're doing good. I think
I-
we're
I
in
mean-
good shape this year.
Yeah.
No complaints.
Representative Wynn.
No, I directed that to you to inform you. No, you weren't here. I don't know where you were. You may have been, well, that's not, we're talking about 2016. But still, the point, I didn't direct it to you to say anything other than that as institutional history, that had occurred.
We've got several more questions that are kind of second questions. I want to give the second little part of the, not little part, but part of the presentation some space, and maybe we'll kind of do some cleanup questions at the end, because we got 30 minutes left, and I got a couple more on the queue that I know are not just one question askers.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm actually, the next phase, I was planning to focus on the importance of early childhood and the research that exists. I would just say we know from decades of research that 90% of brain development occurs in those first few years of life. There are more than 1 million neural connections being formed every second during this stage. It is faster than at any other phase of the life course. Researchers refer to this as brain architecture, and we think of it like building a house and installing the electrical wiring. It is all the connections that help lead to decisions and actions for behavior and thinking and learning and all of the skills. And every interaction a child has during this phase of life will have consequences for better or for worse. So we are always hoping and working for making sure that children are raised with the most positive environment and experiences they can have, and yet we know that an awful lot of children experience neglect and stress and adverse childhood experiences that leave gaps and challenges with that period of rapid development in the brain. We know that when we fail to invest during the first 5 years, we miss a huge window of opportunity, because the costs will show up later, downstream, if we fail to provide for children. It's increased involvement in the judicial system. It's substance abuse issues. It's removal into foster care. It's all sorts of things that can be prevented with the right interventions early on. And I would just frame it as basically we're paying for it one way or the other. It's just we get more return on the investment when we invest early. I'll skip through the research. We've got a Kansas study. I can send Rose a link to it. It's a longitudinal study done with a Wichita-based grant program that we support called the Opportunity Project, or TOP. They got parent consent to follow their preschool kids all the way through high school graduation, and we studied outcomes for those kids. And the control group was a group of children that they weren't prevented from preschool access, but it was families whose children had not actually attended preschool. So the control group was no preschool at all, measured against the group that attended top, and they were matched in terms of demographics and that sort of thing. So it was a proper control. The top students consistently demonstrated better educational outcomes on state reading assessments. Top graduates were 23% more likely to meet or exceed reading standards than their control group peers. Top graduates are 35% less likely than a demographically matched control group to be involved in special ed services. And on average, top graduates had better attendance rates, lower repeat discipline referrals, and higher GPAs. So that mirrors the findings from several really credible national studies that this early intervention for kids pays off. And then we have the Imagination Library. I will skip over what we know from that. It does improve reading scale scores to have your child enrolled in Imagination Library. When we talk about the ecosystem in early childhood, it is a whole range of services. It's not just childcare. It's not just preschool. It can be crisis counseling services, home visiting services, prenatal and maternal support, et cetera. So it comes from multiple state agencies. We come together to provide these services on behalf of families and just try to meet their needs. We know children's needs are really complex and as individual as the child. We're not trying to be all things for all people, and we know families need to be comfortable with the services that are right for them. So there is an element of personal preference woven into the approach to early childhood. When you want to talk about the number of children served, we have a distinct count of children receiving services. That data dashboard is not to be confused as an unduplicated count. We don't have, there's just complications with the available data limitations so that it's hard to match. But we can tell you that within each type of program, we can tell you how many children are being served. We just can't tell you if, how many children are getting 2 services or 3 services. But we do know how many are receiving services. There are roughly 212,000 children under the age of 6 in Kansas, 113,523 enrollments. That doesn't mean 113,000 children. It may mean some other number, but the goal someday would be to have the ability to match data. We are engaged with KSDE's longitudinal data system project and helping pilot the early childhood connection with their data team, and we are really excited about the potential to improve what we can learn and see in the data. In terms of where services are delivered, for early childhood, it's different than K-12. K-12, you primarily have, the public school system and the private school system, and then if people, that may be home-based if it's homeschool or virtual. But for early childhood, there is no system. There's no primary system. Some services are school-based, like preschool and special ed. Some are home-based, like home visiting and childcare. Some are community-based, and when we talk about community-based, it can be public, private, faith-based, for-profit, nonprofit. We work and welcome all quality programs that, we are not looking to just fund a particular environment. This is really about making sure that parents have the ability to find the services that work for their family. Often we see a combination of school and community-based programs working together. And then federal sources make up the primary funding streams for early childhood programs. They're all listed on the slide here. It's the predominant source of funding. State matching funds are provided with a little bit of SGF and a little bit of tobacco settlement CIF funding. In some cases, local communities are providing sales or property tax, some of their local revenue streams, either the city councils or county commissions are providing support. And then the private sector is a big source of funding for early childhood in Kansas. In the case of childcare specifically, I would say parents shoulder the burden of the cost of those programs. So I'm going to pause again, and Mr. Chair, it might be wise up to you whether I answer questions or we invite Dr. Harwood up at this.
I just have one, and it's kind of it's a hard question, and I promise it's not, mean-spirited. It just kind of cuts at kind of the core, you said a statement of the cost will show up later. And I get that, and there's, jail time and, things that are gonna show up in a student or a young adult's life later, because early interventions were not there, whether there was special needs or whether there weren't. And I guess the phrase that came to me is the costs are here, even with what we're doing, especially around reading. And I just, specifically for your group, is there conversation? I mean, because, this has been around to where the things that we're seeing and the things that we're trying to implement for reading solutions, we've had some of these measures, these pre-measures, and they're, in a sense, not being as effective as what they were said they were going to be, in a sense.
If I may, I would say we're serving 8,000 children out of 212,000. I do not today have longitudinal data to show you outside of the Opportunity Projects study, which is, a specific program. We are hoping to get there when the state longitudinal data system is complete. We're going to be matching our data into the KSDE data set so that we can then track our specific universe of children to see how they're doing, because it's kind of the law of averages. Our 8,000 enter kindergarten and become part of that big population of 200,000 students that are enrolled across the state, or 475,000 students enrolled across the state. You're not tracking the benefits of our programs in that population in the state assessment scores. Today, we can't pull out that group of 8,000 that got the benefit of our programs. We agree that we should be able to know more about how students fare that had opportunity to access these services. I would say it's limitations of funding. When you'll hear about the Kansas Preschool Pilot Program. That is not SGF funded. It is, Dr. Harwood has the numbers in his presentation. It is a subset of Kansas students benefiting from those preschool programs. It's a funding question. We don't have more money to put into it from our resources. The question is how we want to address that moving forward.
And in one sense, I agree with you, but all at the same time, my disagreement would be around, there's a lot, there's a good chunk of money, but it's spread out. And it's almost like not enough butter on too much bread. And to keep it in a spot to where, what is the main effect that we want this early development to have? And if that is right now, the climate is around reading. And I'm not saying that maybe it should never get off of that. And what the conversations that are being had in your group that are trying to focus this down to where you can know the results because the funding is specific enough to where it's trackable, I guess would be, and like I said, it's not a combative way of just kind of what I think the whole body is dealing with around education and in your world, early childhood, leading into that. Just any of your thoughts or feedback around those comments?
If I had a magic wand, I would have different, there would not be certain line items transferred from this budget. There would be, we need to talk about SGF investment in early childhood. We are constantly, every session, we get asked to give a rundown of how much is being spent on early childhood. And I know you all have heard a number of, there's over $400 million that was invested. Yes, that was one time pandemic relief funding across the 3 federal pieces of legislation, the CARES Act, the KRISA Act, and the ARPA Act. That totals up to about that much money. That is fact. We were directed to spend that in one-time ways because we did not want to create a $400 million price tag for the state legislature to be left holding the bag. And we did that. We did, not we, me, not the cabinet, but we, the system, did that. The agencies that received various pieces of that funding created, there were bonus payments made to childcare providers, much like bonus payments to teachers came through ESSER funding. Those are things that did not create standing commitments to higher salaries, but they rewarded people who worked very hard through the pandemic, through very difficult situations. There were expanded benefits for families in the child care subsidy program to allow more families to qualify and help offset the high cost of childcare. There were some of these types of projects, one-time resources provided to, 31 million of that was provided to the cabinet for the child care capacity accelerator for major startup operations of new child care facilities. So there were lots of one-time ways that money was spent, but that is not ongoing investment. Annually, and this is a DCF number, so forgive me, I can't quote it specifically, but the Child Care Development Block Grant, which funds the child care benefit that families can qualify for, up to 85% of state median income, you can qualify for this benefit payment. I think it's 70 to 80 million a year. 70% of that has to go to the families. 30% of that federal funding has to be spent on quality improvement activities for childcare, and part of that is the childcare licensing system. So KDHE receives, this is the schematic for the Child Care Development Block Grant funding. Every arrow that you see on the slide that'll come up is a transfer that funding takes between state agencies. So this gets to why do we want to unify governance of early childhood? We are creating red tape and the administrative state, if you will, because there is a state agency designated to receive those funds, and then they have to send them to multiple places to support initiatives. So the funding helps support child care licensing at KDHE, but the money is received by DCF. So now you need a legal agreement between DCF and KDHE to transfer. It's an interagency agreement that has to be created. Now KDHE has to report to DCF on the use of the money, and DCF has to report to the federal government. KDHE then uses some of it to give grants to childcare providers to do some of the things they have to do to stay licensed in good standing. Those providers have to report to KDHE, so KDHE can report to DCF, so DCF can report to the federal government. That is what we create when we have all of this movement of funding between state agencies. That is where we can find efficiency. And I would caution against the notion that if we're not proposing a reduction of FTEs, we're not finding efficiency. I would say there are reasons why we would want to evaluate whether or not we are leveraging resources to the best of our ability before we begin recommending cuts and changes and things like that. Because we have a lot of openings that we need help and have trouble filling. I told you, we're moving from paper-based to an online digital platform. There are people currently helping with the processing of all that paper. We need help desk people to provide help to childcare providers trying to use the digital platform. So while we may not be suggesting reducing the people who handle the paper, we will be recommending that we retrain them so that they can help with the help desk for the online registry. So that may not reduce FTEs, but it sure is going to be more effective and efficient use of their time in the process. In my early career, I worked at Warner Brothers for Clint Eastwood. We were my husband and I both worked at the production company. We were employees of Warner Brothers Filmed Entertainment when we started. In the mid-90s, Time Warner Incorporated merged with Warner Brothers. That merger came with an evaluation top to bottom of operations and rearranging of personnel. The executive ranks all got reorganized, and I don't know if there were layoffs or not. That wasn't what I was tracking at the time. In around 2000, AOL acquired Time Warner Entertainment. They brought in the McKinsey Group to do an evaluation, and that created a menu of recommendations for cutting the expenses to improve the bottom line. Part of that involved changing the structure they had with actors like Clint Eastwood, the high-profile guys, Kevin Costner, Mel Gibson, Clint Eastwood, et cetera. Those actors had production deals. None of our salary was paid for by his company. It was paid for by Warner Brothers. So that was like, hey, do away with that and you will improve the bottom line. Things like that. And I know that's a weird analogy for early childhood, but the point is, in the corporate world, you take some time to evaluate what you have in front of you. We need to see all of the contracts in one place to see if we have duplication in what the state is contracting for. Right now, each agency has their own universe. We don't know. I can't tell you, I can't stand here and provide that, but we do know that when you have a system that looks like this, we can do better. So that would be the pitch for why unification of these programs is something that has been proposed. We are not growing government creating something brand new that doesn't exist. The idea is rearranging what exists so it is a smarter arrangement. Dr. Harwood, would you come talk about KPP for a few minutes and the rest?
You got 9 minutes. Here we go.
Okay, that'll be plenty of time for questions then. So the memo that I provided looks like this one, so there's another one there. And really, I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of where the intersection, kind of the handoff into school. So back to the chair's question a little bit, is kindergarten teachers don't expect students to come in reading. I mean, that's not an expectation we have. So early childhood is about helping them be as ready as they can for kindergarten, because not all students have that this doesn't come naturally in every case, and not everybody has the same opportunities. So that's why some of these are here. So on the first page, we break down preschool programs that are in schools. The first one is the pre-K special education. So Ms. Clarkson yesterday talked a lot about this. So school districts are required to provide services to qualifying students birth to age 21. Now, as she talked about, there are some birth issues that automatically qualify people. Most children are not identified until later on, but once they're identified, they get those services. When they are 3 or 4, then the school district is required to provide preschool services. So a lot of those other services are not preschool services. Now they come to school. These students have to have an IEP at this time. Before that, it's called an IFSP. It's a little bit different because it's not at school, so it's not set up that way. So every district has to provide these services. Again, many districts are in co-ops and are local, so they may be co-oping that. So it may not be in their district. It may be part of that co-op, but they have to provide the service. So these are 23, 24 numbers because that's the last complete number. So there were 6,844 3- and 4-year-olds that received these services, and a preschool student gets counted as 0.5. Really doesn't matter how long they're at school, they get counted as 0.5, even if they're all day. That's how kindergartners used to be counted. Even if you had all-day kindergarten, you still only got funded for 0.5 until 2016. So the next program is preschool at risk, and these students would not be qualified as students with a disability. And the reason, we only count them once, so when Melissa was talking a little bit about duplication, the ones I'm going to talk about now are not duplicated. I'll talk about some duplication in a minute. And the reason they're not duplicated is you can only count them as one thing or the other. And it's typically more financially advantageous for the district to count them as special ed as opposed to at-risk if they do that. To be considered preschool at risk, you have to meet one of the qualifying conditions that's there. So one of those is poverty. And so unlike when we talked about K-12 at risk, getting free lunch does not qualify you for at-risk services. That's how we send the funding. In pre-K at risk, living in a home of poverty, which also is free lunch, does qualify you for the service. The other ones there are different, single parent, family, teen parent. Those don't have a financial qualifier. That's a condition qualifier instead. And so districts may provide these services. So 265 districts out of 286 in 23-24 had pre-K at-risk programs. So that's most of them. So there's a lot of them. And there were 11,770 students last year. The reason I'm not using 24-25 numbers is we're still auditing those. That number tends to get smaller as the year goes on because we tell districts to, when in doubt, count them, and then we'll figure it out during the audit. So it's easier sometimes just to use a completed year, which is what we want to do there. The next group, I try to come up with a better name, but we use non-qualifying students. These are students that don't qualify as at risk or students with special needs. So there is no state funding for these students to the school district. The school district can charge fees. And so at the top, we talk about 72-32-15, which is the statute that lets districts provide pre-K programs. This a lot of times started with, especially with students with special needs, one of the things you're looking at is peer models, having students with disabilities learning alongside their non-disabled peers. This is where a lot of it starts. What's happened recently is we have districts that there is really a dearth of child care in the area. And so we've had school districts that have taken on preschool and child care services. So this would be all day, every day, and sometimes even year round. The required programs are half day, and actually it's a total of 465 hours a year compared to the 1,116 hours that's required for K-12. So the requirements are a partial day, and families, sometimes that doesn't work for them because they need all-day child care. And so the family there would have to be transportation or all those kinds of things. So that's one of the limitations to parents participating in school-based preschool is the idea that it's half day and it's all the transportation and changing during the middle of the day. So again, there were 6,887 students in 23-24. I did not look up how many different districts actually had non-qualifying peers there because some do and some don't. The other ones we're going to talk about is early childhood programs, and this is different than preschool. And the first one is the Kansas Preschool Pilot Grants. So a district that already has an at-risk, pre-K at-risk program could also get a preschool pilot grant. Now again, it's called a preschool pilot grant, and it has since 2006. So we're trying to make sure we really like it before we do anything besides make it a pilot. And this is not SGF funding, it is CIF funding, which Melissa talked about, and TANF funding, which actually is our federal funds that come through DCF. Those funds do come to KSDE, and then we provide the grants. In 2006, it started with $2 million. It's now up to $8,332,317. They always, even if there are no increases, they look at how can we provide the grants to the continuing programs. Any new funding then is at new programs. In order to qualify for a grant, you have to be serving at least 50% of the students you are serving have to qualify as pre-K at risk. So this is one of those things, if districts start to increase their services for non-qualifying students, that could make them not qualify for a preschool pilot grant. And so there are 45 districts that received grants in 23-24 and served 4,115 students. Those would be duplicates because they were already part of another another program. This was to offset the costs of those programs. And then the last one is not a preschool program, it's Parents as Teachers. Melissa talked about this one. This is funded partially by CIF funding. School districts apply for a Parents as Teachers grant, and it requires a one-to-one match. So school districts are using general fund dollars. They can use at-risk funding. The difficulty with that is you can't transfer at-risk funding into the Parents as Teachers Fund, and you have to pay your match out of the Parents as Teachers Fund to tracking. So they could only spend at-risk funds on the amount that's over and above the matching funds would have to come out of general fund. So interesting thing. This is a service that actually can start before birth. It's open to all families that live in the district and goes through the age of, you're eligible until you're eligible to go to school. And this was 7,924 students. I would say that if you know young families and their district has a Parents as Teachers program, I would encourage you to encourage them to reach out. All young parents, especially if it's your first child, you have all those questions about, is my child normal? Is this okay? These folks come into the home, help you do those things. So one of the things they do is if they do notice issues, they know where to recommend you to get evaluation or to get help with that. Otherwise, they have a wide variety of programming. Some of it are educational toy loan services. They actually help parents learn how to learn and play with their children. They do get-togethers with the children. It just depends on the school district what all the services are. But it's a really good program. Again, it's funded by CIF with a match from the district, however they decide that they're going to pay for that. And with that, I would stand for questions, except for I went over by a minute.
I don't know that we want to keep y'all here after 5 on any super pressing questions. I just want to express appreciation. I know I asked a somewhat of a hard question, but just a kind of a focusing question. And I felt like you did a good job with it. And I do appreciate the work that the Children's Cabinet does and the way it's appropriating funds and how it can, and us doing our best to try and find what works for that population of students and for the family. So I appreciate your work, appreciate everybody questions and being here. And with that, we are adjourned.